Hi, welcome to America at its Best. My name is Rebecca Painter and I'm your host. I'm so glad that you're able to join us and hear the good news that your supportive state policy network is making possible. And today is no exception. We are going to be talking about energy. This network is leading the way to make sure that there are sustainable and affordable and secure energy sources all across the country. And I'm delighted to let you know we are joined by John Hinderaker, the CEO of Center for American Experiment in Minnesota, to tell us all about how he is a key leader and a key player in the fight to make sure that our energy sources are reliable, secure, and affordable for Americans. John, I'm so glad you're here with us today. Welcome to the show.
Rebecca, great to be with you.
So John, let's just go ahead and get started with the big elephant in the room for people who, and I don't know that our viewers need this as much, but there are some new people tuning in who aren't as attuned to this. We're hearing so much about so-called green energy from the state and federal government right now. And look, we all care about the environment. We all want what's best for the environment, but you're telling me that green energy isn't as good as it seems. Why not?
Well, the first thing you have to realize, Rebecca, is that this is all driven by carbon dioxide, global warming. That's the rationale. But when these people talk about green energy, they don't mean nuclear, which does not emit CO2, is affordable and is reliable. And they don't mean hydropower either. They're talking about wind and solar energy. And the problem is that wind and solar energy are inherently unreliable because they're weather dependent. They are unbelievably expensive, and they are both terrible for the environment.
So what about bills for American people? Those are going to continue to go up, or might they go down under all the green energy?
Well, unfortunately, Rebecca, they have gone up and they're going to continue to go up. Our organization, American Experiment, our energy team has developed the only model anyone has around the country that will accurately assess the full cost, not the partial cost, but the full cost of wind and solar projects. And we have now used that model in 12 states, including our own state of Minnesota, to cost out these so-called green energy proposals. And what you find, Rebecca, is that the cost is simply astronomical.
So tell us more about what you've done in these 12 states and what changes have come about because of this work.
So people come to us, Rebecca. People learn that we have this model. They've got a wind and solar proposal in their state, and a number of states have come to us. One state has actually hired us, state agencies. Usually it's other groups within the network. For example, the John Locke group in North Carolina came to us. They had a big proposal that was being enthusiastically backed by the local utility because these things make utilities billions of dollars, literally. And they asked if we could cost it out, and we used our model, and we did that, and we wrote a report together with the John Locke folks and they distributed it to legislators and journalists and staffers, and the result was that proposal was voted down. So there have been places around the country where we've had real success.
And what about the Build Back Better plan? Were there some issues there that you were able to get involved with and fight back against?
Yeah, the original cosmic version of Build Back Better, the one that didn't pass, included the Clean Energy Performance Plan, which was a wind and solar mandate that would be applied to all 50 states. And there was a modest amount of money that was appropriated in that bill that supposedly was enough to cover the cost of those mandates. So Americans for Prosperity in Washington came to us and they said, we understand you've got a model that will accurately assess the cost of wind and solar. Is that right? We said, yeah, we do. And they said, could you use that model to analyze the cost of the mandates and build back better on a state-by-state basis? We said, yeah, we could do that. And so they asked us to start with a couple of states, and we did, ones that were politically pivotal. And what we found was that the cost estimates that were in the bill and with the cash was supposedly enough to cover were a tiny fraction of the true cost of these mandates. And we're told that analysis is at least one of the reasons why that original version of Build Back Better failed, and the scaled down version did not include those wind and solar mandates.
So is what you're saying is that generally the rule of thumb that you found is that state and federal regulations in terms of green energy are not good for the environment, and they're very expensive in terms of the costs of the American public on their energy bills and such.
And they also won't give you reliable energy. You know, the average wind turbine produces the electricity maybe 40% of the time. Where I live, solar panels produce the electricity about 18% of the time. What that means is most of the time, you're not using those facilities at all. Most of the time, you're just burning natural gas. And the people who advocate for so-called green energy never talk about that. And they never include the cost of all those natural gas plants in the cost of their so-called green energy proposals. But, you know, we've done a report on the proposal in Minnesota that came from our governor. It's passed the House. It's going to be voted on tomorrow in the Minnesota Senate. And our analysis shows that this proposal, which is all electricity to come from wind and solar by the year 2040, would cost $313 billion, which is just frankly an impossible number. And we would have blackouts. If we have the same weather under this proposal that we had in 2020, we would have extensive blackouts across Minnesota that frankly would be fatal for some people in our state. And so based on that report, based on that analysis, we have mounted a strong opposition to this bill. So far, we've gotten about 30,000 emails sent to our governor and to state legislators urging them to oppose this, so-called green energy proposal.
John, I don't like to sound like a conspiracy theorist. I think everyone who watches the show, I hope, knows that by now. But I've talked with your colleagues at other state think tanks who are very deep into the energy space, and I've been listening with my ear to the ground, especially recently, about these issues. You just mentioned the blackouts. I know, obviously, we all expect that from California, and we look to California, at least I do, as, oh, those crazy Californians. That's California. But now you see Colorado on the heels with the blackouts. Someone said to me recently, I live in South Carolina, it's coming for you there too. This is going to happen all over the country before you know it. Can you speak to that a little bit? I guess my question is that true in your opinion? And number two, how are American people letting this happen? Are we desensitized? Because if my power goes out for more than, I don't know, a minute and a half, I lose my mind. How are we so desensitized to all of this?
Well, Rebecca, as you may remember, around Christmas, there were blackouts in 5 or 6 southeastern states for which Duke Energy later apologized. But the fact is, if the wind doesn't blow, the lights don't go on. And if it's nighttime and the sun isn't shining, if that's what you're relying on, the lights don't go on. MISO, the Mid-Continent Independent Systems Operator, runs the grid for basically about 15 Midwestern states, including Minnesota. And they have warned that their grid is at serious risk of blackouts this winter. And what we're seeing so far is the tip of the iceberg. If we continue down this path of relying more and more on energy sources that most of the time, Rebecca, most of the time don't work, inevitably we're going to have widespread blackouts. Why is this happening? I think it's happening because this whole green energy push, which is making enormous amounts of money for some people, including some utilities, has been one of the most effective propaganda campaigns in American history. And I think most people, we find this in our polling. If you ask the average person, well, how do you feel about green energy? The answer is, oh, I think green energy is good. But people have not been educated unless they've been reading our stuff or materials produced by other organizations like ours. They don't understand the cost, and then they don't understand the unreliability, and they certainly don't understand the environmental impacts of wind and solar facilities.
Well, there's no doubt we must have energy independence. And I think, John, you know better than anyone that there is a big push in the states right now to gain energy independence. So can you walk us through a couple of things that are happening in the states to gain some footing there?
Sure. I think it's important to understand that China controls the market for solar panels. They also control the market for wind turbines. And they also control an overwhelming majority of the processing of the raw materials that are needed for wind and solar energy. So if we go the route of wind and solar energy, we are basically turning our economy, turning our future over to the Chinese Communist Party. You know, Rebecca, a lot of people don't understand this. The average wind turbine contains about 18,000 pounds of copper. Think about that, 18,000 pounds of copper. If we actually go through with this so-called green energy project, it is going to be the biggest mining effort in the history of the world by an enormous margin. And so how can we have energy independence? Well, we can have energy independence if we use our own fossil fuels, which is coal and natural gas, which we have more of than anybody else in the world, and of course, petroleum. Or if we don't want to do that, we have plenty of uranium. Nuclear power works, nuclear power is reliable, nuclear power is affordable. So if we want energy independence, the path is very clear. Don't rely on the red Chinese, use our own resources.
Great advice. And what do you see, John? Look, it's 2023. We're one day in to a new month of the year here. What do you see as some of the biggest, most important legislative fights happening in 2023 for this year that will matter in terms of energy independence?
Well, I think what we're seeing in Minnesota is typical. There is a bill, which, as I mentioned, is going to be voted on this afternoon in the Minnesota Senate. And most people think it's going to pass. The Democrats have a 1-vote margin in the Minnesota Senate. And I think what we're seeing is typical of what a lot of states are seeing, which is a push for these so-called green energy mandates that define green as being wind and solar, not nuclear or hydro. And these tend to be long-term projects, right? So this is a goal that supposedly in our case is to be achieved by 2040. We're basically copying California here, by the way. You know, and if you ask the proponents of this bill in my state, where's your feasibility study? They don't have one. If they say, well, what's your cost estimate? They don't have one. If you say, well, where is your analysis that shows that you can do this and keep the lights on? They don't have such an analysis. They're just copying California, and California doesn't have one either. And so this is the kind of thing that we're seeing around the country, and the kind of thing that we've used our model and our expertise to oppose in a number of states.
And is your model, and are you also seeing this in terms of mandates on electric vehicles and things like that? I mean,
yes, Rebecca, great point. We're seeing that here in Minnesota. We're seeing it nationally. We're seeing it around the country. The only way this situation could get worse is if we also have mandates to electrify pretty much everything in the world, force us to drive electric vehicles. Where is that electricity going to come from? Where is the stable, reliable grid that's going to provide the electricity to run all those cars? Now they're talking about banning gas stoves and forcing all of us to cook on electric stoves, which is a terrible idea for many reasons. But again, this push to electrify everything just magnifies the evils of relying on unreliable and expensive sources to furnish our electricity.
And do you see the solution to this being one, not just with facts, but some kind of a cultural shift? Because as you said, the people believe the warm fuzzies of what they've been told about a lot of these things. So how you have facts and data on your side, and they certainly are compelling. So how are you getting those in the hands of Americans who otherwise have really bought into this other narrative that they've been hearing for so long?
Rebecca, using our limited budget, right? We do a lot of things. We're very active in social media. We put up billboards. We put ads on the radio talking about energy and the cost of energy. We do everything we can. We write op-eds. Obviously, we produce papers. We do everything we can to get facts into the hands of the public, and other groups around the country, I think, are making similar efforts. The big question in my mind, Rebecca, is, are we going to be able to educate people in time so that we can turn this freight train around? Or what's the alternative? The alternative is that the day comes, number one, when people see that their electric bills are are skyrocketing, and that's happening. And number two, the day when they flip the switch and the lights don't go on. And the potential for catastrophe, both economic catastrophe and human disaster is there. It's a very, very serious issue. And so my hope is that we can fend this whole thing off and turn it in a good direction before people learn the hard way that blackouts are a reality, and that these green energy proposals simply don't work.
Well, John, thank you for your leadership on energy. I mean, the work you are doing is making a tremendous difference for this country. Your leadership is unmatched. I know there are a growing group of CEOs in our network who are working alongside you, and I'm just so thankful for everything you're doing. So thankful for everything our supporters who are tuning in right now, I know have been supporting your efforts and many others in this network. You guys are making a big difference and so important right now. So big thank you for joining us on the show today. Really appreciate all that you're doing. And thanks to those of you who've tuned in. I hope you can join us next month, where we'll be talking about the massive win for education savings account that you just saw in the last couple of weeks, both in Iowa and in Utah. It's a good start to 2023. Lots of big wins already happening and shaking up the country. Thanks for all you do. We'll see you next time. Bye.